I believe that I saw a creature as an early teenager that simply defies the natural bindings of this very world. I don't want you to write me off as a nut, but I believe it was a chupacabra, based off the couple few times I had seen it. I grew up with my parents owning lots of livestock, and we would find cattle, goats, chickens, all dead. This didn't happen though until one hot summer, about late July actually, when all of a sudden we started finding them dead constantly. It was the way in which they all died what bothered me so much. My parents too. These animals weren't killed by coyotes or even mountain lions like many would speculate. In fact, they weren't even eaten on. They had their blood drained from their bodies entirely. Every single one. Everyone we found, it was the same situation on repeat. They had their blood drained, their entire body. We were at a loss for what to make out of it. My parents were poor. They both grew up poor, and they had little education, so raising and selling livestock was how they made a living. It set us back a lot in that time, and it seems like every other day we were having a chicken drop off dead, or a goat that would be found dead. The first time that we found any dead, it happened to be a pair of goats that my parents owned and were getting ready to sell to a couple of my parents' business partners. They were going to purchase them and expand on their goat milk production, or so I was told. At the time of this particular event, I was probably about 13. They found them the very next morning, outside their goat pen, dead. 2 huge holes in their neck, in the same spot on both animals. Blood drained completely from their bodies, with no markings or anything else on their bodies. There were no signs of a fight or any sort of struggle. From the looks of it, these goats had literally just laid down on their side and extended their necks and just perished. It was shortly after that that we started finding chickens dead in the same way, and even a few cattle here and there, all having the same 2 large puncture holes in their neck, until one night, in about mid to late August, we saw the culprit for the first time. My father began pulling the animals closer to the house, considering this worked at nighttime, and he would stay up, waiting for whatever it was to show up. And it did, when he gave it enough time to show itself. The best way I can tell it to you is it's probably about 4 feet tall, with a really large head and huge black eyes. Its mouth was chock full of razor teeth, and I remember it having 2 large vampire-like fangs. It was hunched over, kind of like an old woman, with tiny hands but large claws that seemed to not even fit on the hands. The creature was simply hideous looking, and looked like it was out of a horror movie, or even a science fiction movie. It's like an experiment that was gone wrong. If I had to try and piece together in the animal kingdom, I would say it kind of reminded me of a tiny human, mixed with a naked mole rat, mixed with a gray alien. That description does it piss poor justice, but I'm trying to give you somewhat of an idea, because there's not really an accurate picture of a representation of this thing. If this is truly what a chupacabra is, then they are far more elusive and dangerous than we previously thought. At the time, I didn't know this was a chupacabra. I just thought it was some sort of creature that was preying on our livestock. Every night, it would just keep coming back for more and more and more. My father had shot at it multiple times, swearing, doing everything he could to try and block it off, but it just kept coming back. There were even times where I swear he hit it right in the back of the head with his gun, but it didn't even budge. It would just run off. When it would run, I remember it running on all 4s, but when it would stand or walk around, it was only on 2. The thing was freaky looking. That's all I remember. Being 13, I don't have as many memories as I wish I would of it. Or maybe I don't wish. Things got so serious to the point to where my father worked some sort of deal out with some men who were apparently a part of the mafia or cartel or some gang, because at nighttime, he would get 3 to 4 armed guards walking around the premises. It scared me and my mother. Not only was this creature a reoccurring visitor, but now we had cartel men with guns around the perimeter. My father didn't have any money, and I didn't feel like he was in any position to be gambling with men like that. For all I know, he probably put my mother and I up as collateral in case he couldn't pay them. Which, by the way, I don't know how he ever hired them in the first place. The only thing I really knew is that he had friends in higher places, but to the extent of that, I was never sure. My dad was kind of a man who was always incognito, especially with his friend circle. After a month or two, the sightings ceased, and the men stopped coming around, so I want to say it was only maybe 6 weeks really that this happened. Life ended up going back to normal after some time, and fast forward, I eventually moved away for college and moved out of the state. My parents still live there though, and they're still doing the whole livestock thing and selling it. My dad doesn't outright talk about it, and I haven't asked about it in a long time, but it has probably been left for good, or so I hope. So, I'm emailing you because I got some crazy stuff to talk to you about. Part of my family owns a ranch, and they're selling it and moving out here to the east to start over. Why is that a big deal? Because they've had that ranch for over 20 years, and you'll never believe what is going on over there. They're finding their animals dead, with the blood sucked out of their necks. I kid you not. They are panicked so much that they're moving their operations from West Texas to out here in New York State. I don't know what kind of animals they had or what animals they raised, but I know they had lost over 17 of their horses from this same creature. My uncle, who is a firm believer in Bigfoot, considering that he's had 3 to 4 accounts of his own which are terrifying, I'll have to get him to send you his stories. He's seen this creature, and luckily for him, he's a huge cryptozoology guy, so he knows firsthand what he's dealing with. He knows that this is a chupacabra, based on what he has seen himself and the research he has done in the past. He has tried killing this thing with traps, bullets, you name it. Nothing seems to stop it. It's already claimed over 17 of their horses, as I just told you, and this creature is getting more and more hostile, venturing further and closer to his family. He was very prideful at first, claiming he wasn't going to let it take over. But after losing so many and risking so much, he's now really starting to see the big picture, rethinking the safety of his family. I wish I had more to include for you, but it's the only thing I know, and he's the only person I know that's actually dealing with a first-hand account of a real-life chupacabra. This occurred last month. In the midst of all the quarantine craziness, I saw a very bizarre creature that I never would have imagined seeing in my life. This was in a rather secluded hunting area in thick, piney woods. This was around the Sam Rayburn Lake in Texas. I rightfully decided to take some time to hike around because I was just getting far too stir crazy, being at home with COVID and everything. I had full plan to set up a tent and everything after the sun had gone down. It wasn't totally pitch black yet, but it was getting there. Light and visibility had gotten far more poor, and that's when I began to hear something around me. Poking its head out from the thicker brush, about 50 feet away, was a face that I couldn't quite discern right away, but then realized quickly that it was not human. It had very large black eyes, and then it opened its mouth and revealed its sharp teeth and what appeared to be oversized canine fangs. That's when it jumped out of the brush on all fours and took off in the opposite direction. I only saw the body momentarily, but it was weird looking. It had a large alien head, because that's what came to mind at the time, but the body was like that of a hairless cat. By the way, if you have ever seen that breed of cat, they're hideous, at least in my opinion. The body reminded me of a cat. Even the way it moved was very feline-like, but again, no hair. It had dark gray mangy skin. It was hard to get a vivid and full accurate details of everything on this thing, because it was so quick. It was there and then it wasn't. But I did see its face without a doubt. enough time that I could remember the important details. It started off with me feeling watched before it ever stuck its head out, so I'm assuming that it was walking to the area and happened to watch me before it ever revealed itself. I don't know if its intent was to reveal itself to me, or if I just happened to be looking and scouting and then seeing its face peering at me through the brush. While I was shaking momentarily because I had no idea what it was that I had just encountered, it didn't veer me away from leaving. I left the next day with plenty of time to go over the scenario in my head and what I saw. I do believe that what I saw was a creature I've never seen before, and I'm terrible at making up stories, so this is my actual account of what happened. You seem to be the expert on creatures that are in the unknown category, so I'll let you explain to me what it is I saw. Back in the year 1998, I was near the Omaha Reservation along the Missouri River in northeastern Nebraska. This is what I was told was one of the hotbeds of Thunderbird sightings, and surprisingly, I had my own. I was with a hiking partner going up a trail when we saw, maybe about 40 yards to the north, a large bird ascend above the treetops up into the sky. We only saw it as soon as we did because of the immediate movement. It was large and white and had an enormous wingspan, far bigger than any bird that I have ever seen. I'm not exaggerating when I say that this bird was probably 4 times that of an eagle. Its body and head alone would have been the size of a human torso and head, maybe larger. It shot up from the treetops and ended far away in the direction heading southeast. It didn't make any noise or call that any birds usually make. My friend and I were shocked at what we saw. I was familiar with animals and creatures of living legends like Bigfoot and Thunderbird, but I never knew that I would see one for myself. Not now. Not ever. As I spent more time in the area and the Omaha Reservation, I would learn that this is actually a hotbed spot for not only the Bigfoot phenomenon, but Thunderbird as well. Maybe among the natives who don't really share their sightings with many people outside the res. However, if you get a chance to sit down and talk with them, they will share with you story after story of these things in the area. I wasn't frightened at all, and I never felt threatened by seeing this creature. It was probably the most majestic thing I've ever seen. Its size alone was impressive. I felt like I saw a Pegasus or something for the first time. Something you would feel like is supposed to exist during the time of Greek gods. It was a beautiful sight to see. I feel so special for getting to be gifted for seeing such a rare animal. I saw a bird larger than any animal you could ever imagine. It was like a flying bison, it was so huge. I could tell you the exact date and time this happened too. It was June 28th, 2011. I was driving down in southern New Mexico. There were other vehicles on the road at the time of this sighting. It was a very hot sunny day, clear skies, not a cloud to be seen. Temperatures are soaring down there. If you've ever been in the desert, you know how hot it gets. I saw this large flying object, what I thought was an object, descend closer to the ground and then fly westbound past some smaller mountains. It glided with ease, and I never saw it flap its massive wings once. I saw as it got closer that it was actually the largest bird I'd ever seen. I watched it the entire time it appeared, until the time it cleared the horizon, all the while maintaining my composure behind the wheel. I wasn't even sure if what I was seeing was real. The bird looked to be gray in color from what I could tell just by the way the light was hitting it. I've never seen a bird that looks like that before, let alone being the size of an actual bison flying through the air. I'm sure I was not the only one who saw this thing flying, because it wasn't a desolate lone road. There were multiple other cars driving around me, since that area I was driving around was very open, and anybody with a clear view of the sky would have seen it. I'm gonna guesstimate that it was probably a couple 100 feet off the ground. It was very high up in the sky and descended pretty low, to probably about a couple 100 feet altitude. and then it disappeared off on the horizon to the west. That was the only time I've ever seen an animal that I could not identify. My Thunderbird sighting happened back in the spring of 2018. I was just outside the small town of Berlin in Connecticut, alongside Highway 15. I saw what I can only describe as the biggest bird in existence. This thing flew from one side of the road to the other, very low to the ground, but still above the trees. It just happened to be passing over as we were driving. It was a clear afternoon, around 1 p.m. I was with myself and my mother in the car, but I saw it in front of me and kind of almost pooped when I saw it. I saw it for approximately 3 seconds as it flew from one side to the other, but it looked just like an oversized blackbird, the size of my small sedan. I saw it had a curvature at the end of its beak that pointed downward, and kind of like a gizzard beard thing that hung down from its neck. No, not like a turkey gizzard, but like an extra thing of hair that dangled down. I've been out in the forest and lived life long enough to know that that was not a normal creature you're going to see every day. Not anybody I knew or know personally, but just heard things through people I've known. I live outside the city of Kingston, New York, and good old Ulster County. I don't know if you would know anything about this, but it's something that I find particularly interesting. I've heard stories of a massive bird that flies down and swoops up cattle. Crazy, ain't it? Well, apparently it's been spotted enough times that people are on the lookout for it around here, and it's even been shot at multiple times because, I guess, it steals cows. Imagine that. A bird of prey large enough that can steal your livestock. I've not seen anything like it myself. I've only heard stories from people I know and friends of mine. I guess there was a ranch, from what I heard, about 70 miles from here, that lost so many cattle from this thing, they had to shut down indefinitely. I guess these birds would fly down, grab the cattle, fly about 300 to 400 feet in the air, and drop the cattle to let them fall to their death. Then they would fly back down and around, pick the dead cattle back up, and fly off with their fresh kill. Pretty harrowing stuff if you ask me. You can't make this up. I know it sounds like it's straight out of a horror fiction novel, but I'm hearing it from multiple different people, the same kind of stuff over and over. I guess it's not just around here either. It's even more common than you think as you go closer towards the Midwest, like Michigan, Ohio, that whole area. Just when times could not get any crazier, we have to deal with this. I guess there was an older gentleman somewhere along the way that actually ended up killing one of these things, and he kept a skull around, but that's all hearsay. And honestly, who really knows who has it now and where it's really at? If these kinds of birds really do exist, well, I guess it won't be too long before I see one myself. Anyway, just wanted to say I'm a huge fan of your channel, and I watch all your videos. I thought you might really eat this information up. Thanks so much for reading. I'm not going to claim to know anything about birds because I don't. But I'm pretty sure birds do not come out at night, unless it's an owl or a bat. However, this one night we came across the largest nocturnal bird, but I'm pretty sure it was not an owl, just judging by its shape. And its size, of course, because owls don't get to be the size of a human. Let me explain. This was just in the fall of last year, October. Walking around outside with my dad and I at nighttime. It was roughly 10 p.m. That's when we heard a huge crash near us in the trees. My father and I looked up, and perched on one of the larger thick branches of the tree was this massive shape that resembled a bird. It was humongous and blacker than the darkness around it. I think that's one of the reasons why it stood out so much and why we were able to spot it almost immediately. It moved its head, and my dad and I just felt like it was staring at both of us. We couldn't see any eyes because of how dark it was. It was just this large black shape that resembled that of a perched bird. Here's the issue that I have with it. Birds don't get to the height of 6 or 7 feet. This thing perched on the branch was larger than my father or I, and right as we heard the crashing, the thing immediately folded its wings up, so neither of us truly saw its wingspan in full. If it was a bird that large, then its wingspan had to have been massive. I felt like it was probably a good idea to back away from this animal, because I did not feel safe, and the situation felt very unpredictable. My dad, without breaking eye contact on this thing, whispered to me quietly, "Back away slowly." We backed away all the way to the house without ever breaking sight on this bird, and it followed us with its gaze the entire way. It never broke its eye contact either, and it stayed perfectly still. We made it back to the house. The entire time we made it, we're both going nuts, thinking, what did we just see? What kind of animal is that? Is there even such a thing as nocturnal birds? Did we just see something new? About an hour goes by, and my dad steps back outside to see if he could still see it. Maybe it's still there. The spot in the tree that it was sitting at is now empty, meaning it was gone. Still, it's one of the weirdest things to have ever happened to me. I don't know that there was such a thing as a large nocturnal bird, but I guess there is now.